Welcome to episode 6 of the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. This episode is all about the fight for the House. Which party is best positioned to win the majority? Where are the toss-up races? The 10 races with the recent rating changes? And where did Republicans recently recruit a NASCAR driver to race across the finish line? Buckle up. Hello, I'm Nathan Gonzales, and I enjoy vacationing in Florida's 11th district. Yes, that's Disney World.
I'm Erin Covey, and I really love the Blue Ridge Mountains, which is several congressional districts. So it stretches like from North Carolina's 11th district all the way up to Virginia's 6th district.
We might have to do that again when we get North Carolina districts for the 5th time this decade.
I know.
There we go.
And I'm Jacob.
It's the Asheville region. That's all that matters.
I'm Jacob Rubashkin. And like the president, I enjoy going to the beaches of Delaware, which has its own at-large congressional district.
Well, I should clarify that it's not really a vacation when you're taking 4 kids to Disney. It's more like a trip. Your destinations sound far more relaxing than mine.
Yeah, you should be fairly compensated.
Before we get to our big topic, let's do a few headlines. Erin, why don't you start?
Yeah, so another major candidate has announced they're running in the race to succeed Colin Allred, who, in case you haven't heard, is running against Ted Cruz in the Senate race in Texas. So the new candidate is Democratic State Representative Retta Bowers, who announced her campaign a couple of days ago. And I thought it was interesting. Her announcement video actually took a veiled shot at the front runner in the race right now, who is another state representative in Texas, Julie Johnson. So I think this is shaping up to be a pretty heated primary. And whoever wins the Democratic primary for this district, which is based in Dallas, will almost certainly win the general election. So that's going to be the race to watch.
Yeah, usually candidates avoid kind of sparring early on, but that's interesting. Jacob, what should we not miss?
So Virginia Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton, who represents part of Northern Virginia, announced this week that she has a more aggressive form of Parkinson's disease than she had previously thought. She announced her initial diagnosis earlier this year, and she will not seek a 4th term in Congress. That means her 10th district will be an open seat next year. Democrats shouldn't have any problem holding this seat, which has really bolted away from Republicans over the past decade. But there could be a large and messy primary on the Democratic side to determine their nominee. However, with everyone focused on the local elections going on in Virginia this fall, this November, for the General Assembly, it's likely that everyone's going to wait until after those races are completed to turn their attention to the 10th district race.
Do we think Hung Kao is going to drop down from the Senate race and run again here?
I think that there will probably be some level of effort to try and get him to do so. But, I think, look, the reality is Virginia statewide is actually better for Republicans bipartisanship than the 10th congressional district. So even though Cal fell just a few points short against Wexton last year, from a political angle, it might actually be a little bit easier for him to win statewide. Of course, relatively speaking, it's very difficult for a Republican to win statewide in Virginia these days.
Yeah, and even though we're obviously a nonpartisan podcast, I think it's okay to say that our prayers are with the Congresswoman, and it brings a humanity to this. I think as we cover elections, it can be sometimes maybe we can treat it as a game too much, but these are real people with real lives and sometimes real medical issues that they're dealing with. And so I think this is a good reminder of that.
Yeah, there was a really moving story in the Washington Post in which Wexton, discussed her diagnosis at length that I recommend everyone listening go check out.
Yeah, and the other piece of news that people shouldn't miss is that Republican Senator Mitt Romney of Utah decided not to seek a second term. It doesn't alter the fight for the Senate because Republicans are very likely to hold the seat, but it is an important development because Romney was one of the few Republican critics of former President Donald Trump on Capitol Hill. So his voice being absent will be notable. The Republican field to replace Romney is still taking shape. We'll talk more about that in the future. But Mitt Romney on his way out of Congress. The Inside Elections podcast is sponsored by George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management, or GSPM. The GSPM program offers master's degrees in legislative affairs and political management with in-person and online schedules designed for the working professional. I was a beneficiary of that schedule because I was working full-time for the Rothenberg Political Report, writing and reporting and analyzing races and doing GSPM classes at night. It took me 2 years, 2 full years, so year-round, spring, fall, and winter to get my degree. But I'm happy that I got my master's. So click on the link below and check out what the GSPM program has to offer. Let's dive into our big topic, the fight for the House.
NBC News is projecting that Republicans will control the House for the next 2 years after winning enough seats to have a majority in the chamber.
Latest on the midterms, Republicans have taken back control of the House of Representatives, bringing back divided government to Washington. They'll have a slim majority, but likely to be enough to block much of President Biden's agenda.
That was a trip down memory lane to 2022 when Republicans gained 9 seats to capture the majority and eventually elect Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. Now Democrats are in the minority and need a net gain of 5 seats to get back to control. That's not very many out of 435. But first, before we dive into individual races, let's focus on the big picture. A little more than 13 months from Election Day, does either party have an advantage in the fight for the majority? Erin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question right now, especially so far out from the election. But I think one thing that's notable is, unlike the Senate map, in which Democrats control almost all of the vulnerable Senate seats that are up for reelection, the House battleground is pretty evenly divided. And you'll see that in our ratings too. We have 68 competitive races, 35 of those are Republican held, 33 of those are Democratic held. And then in terms of the solid Republican and solid Democratic races, there are 182 solid Republican seats and 171 solid Democratic seats. So it's a pretty evenly split field. It's really going to depend on who wins those toss-up races. We have 11 toss-ups right now, and we'll go into a little more detail talking about those races individually. But I think at this point, obviously, the onus is on Democrats to net those 5 seats, but it's going to be a really close fight.
Yeah, and 218 is the magic number that either party needs. Jacob, do you think either party has an advantage right now?
Look, I think it's just so difficult, like Erin said, to put that level of specificity on a question like this 14 months before an election. I think both parties have some advantages. Both parties have some opportunities. It's almost a philosophical question. Would you rather be Republicans and have more seats, right? They're in the majority. All they need to do is hold serve in order to win, but they're defending in some pretty blue territory. Or would you rather be Democrats who have to beat incumbents, right, in order to win, right? They have to go out and do something that, we know is difficult in politics, to beat an incumbent. The one thing I would say, I guess the two things I would say is, as our ratings stand now, Republicans have a little bit of an advantage, right? Just structurally more solid seats that they can count on. And when North Carolina puts out their new maps, that number is probably going to grow. The other thing I would say on the opposite side of the ledger is, we're looking at a Biden-Trump rematch in 2024 at the presidential level. If you go back to 2020, I want to say that it was 222 House districts that voted for Biden, and 213 that voted for Trump. While we know that That's not exactly how the House races are going to go. We also know that it's probably the best predictor of how the House races are going to go. So if we just run a real repeat of that election with the same results or very similar results, Democrats might have a slight structural advantage themselves on these current districts.
And to me, that presidential shadow is really looming over the whole fight for the House, because I believe in 2020, only 16 districts, I know we're throwing a lot of numbers out there, but only 16 districts voted for a different party for president than it did for the House. And so that, again, shows that strong correlation between what's happening at the top of the ballot. And anyone that tells you they know for sure how a Biden-Trump rematch is going to work out with an unpopular, aging Democratic incumbent president against a former president who's been indicted 4 times and is only 3.5 years younger than the current president. But anyone who tells you they know that's going to work out, is probably lying to you. But that race matters when it comes to the fight for the House.
Yeah, and I'll also add, for anyone who's checking my math, we haven't, like Jacob said, we haven't rated any of the North Carolina districts, and that's because redistricting is still ongoing there for like the 25th time in that state. And then we also have
they like to do it every year. Let's just redraw the map
every 2 years.
They need other hobbies.
Just a fun activity for them. But aside from North Carolina, we also have potentially pending maps in Alabama, maybe New York, maybe Georgia, maybe Louisiana. And you'll see a lot of attention on these redistricting fights because it could come down to 1 or 2 seats, which is why the fact that Democrats are probably going to net a seat in Alabama and Republicans are probably going to net 3 seats in North Carolina is going to really matter for 2024.
Yeah, it's interesting that when you talk, we have been talking to Republican and Democratic strategists, the real strategists that are working on the races, not the ones that you sometimes see on TV and you're not really sure what races they're working on. But there's really a confidence that their nominee is going to perform at least as well as they did in 2020, if not better. That Biden, particularly against Trump, he's going to carry those same districts and maybe even do better. Or vice versa, or that Trump is going to do at least as well as he did because Biden is in such a weakened position, according to Republicans. But I'm just not convinced that that's necessarily the case. I think both parties are walking into these elections with a higher level of risk and the potential that their presidential nominee, that their support implodes, and that would have a dramatic impact on the fight for the House. I mean, we're not coming down on official. I don't think Republicans or Democrats have a big advantage, but I think it's going to be very connected to the presidential outcome.
And look, I think that, we saw in 2020 how quickly that can change, right? I think if you went back to September of 2020, when it looked like Trump was dead in the water in the presidential race, the scope of House races that we thought were going to be in play was significantly wider than what ultimately came to pass after Trump kind of rebounded during October and heading into November. And we ended up with a pretty narrow, generally speaking, presidential election result. And I think that there's a lot of data to suggest that a lot of people made up their mind in the presidential in the last couple weeks of the race, and that choice then trickled down to how they voted on the congressional ballot as well. So if it can change that much in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we've got 14 months before voters go to the polls, it just underlines the uncertainty here.
Yeah, and we love to get into the weeds on races, right? I mean, that's what we do. When we talk through these races, again, with strategists on both sides of the aisle, they are very confident that, their incumbents or their challengers are going to overperform Biden or Trump, or they're excited that Doug Mastriano is not on the ticket this cycle in Pennsylvania and everything's going to be better. But it's probably going to be a mixed bag, right? That Democrats, are looking for that boost in California and New York, where they feel like they underperformed in the midterm elections. Republicans are looking for that boost in Pennsylvania from the midterms because Mastriano is not running for governor on a ticket. So it could be a mixed result, which then all adds up to another close fight for the House because the majority is so close and the margins are so few. Let's dive into some of those individual races.
I'm John Duarte.
I'm Mike Garcia.
I'm Yadira Caravale.
I'm Gabe Vasquez.
I'm Anthony D'Esposito.
I'm Mike Lawler.
I'm Brandon Williams.
I'm Lori Chavez-DeRemer.
I'm Marie Perez, and I approve this message.
Those are the members of Congress who represent nearly all of our 11 toss-up races. There's also the open seat in Michigan's 7th District, which, Erin, you're writing about for the next issue of the newsletter. And it did not include George Santos, which is his own unique race. But which of those races tells us most about what's going on nationally or is most interesting to you, Jacob?
Look, I think the most interesting thing about this list is the kinds of states that are on it, right? Right off the bat, we've got 7 states, 7 districts that are either in New York or California, states that we do not consider to be competitive states at the presidential level, certainly, or at the statewide level in almost all cases, but they make up more than half of our toss-up category. You go down the list: California, Colorado, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Washington. What do all these states have in common? They're all Biden states. They're all states that are generally considered Democratic. I think Michigan is probably the most marginal of any of them. And that's really, it's really telling about where Democrats are on offense, where Republicans are on defense, and what kind of inroads Republicans made in the blue territory last cycle. I think these districts run the gamut. Obviously, a district like Colorado 8 or Michigan 7 are probably the two most evenly divided of our toss-up races, just in terms of their overall partisanship. Most of these seats, quite frankly, are Democratic-leaning seats. They're seats that voted for Joe Biden by as much as 13, 14 points in the last presidential election. But, a seat like Colorado 8 is a very marginal seat. Went for Biden by about 4 points. Democratic incumbent. She was only elected with about 48.3% of the vote, which is lower, I believe, than the vote share of any other incumbent member of Congress. Right. It's a new district. It's brand new. It didn't exist until last year. And it is, if anything, trending relative to the state toward Republicans. And so there's a lot going on there. There's a competitive Republican primary, freshman Democrat looking to hold on in a changing district. That's a really interesting one. And then, of course, that Michigan 7 seat, one of, if not the most evenly divided district in the country, that's also going to see quite an interesting matchup down the line as well.
Yeah, Erin, tell us where is Michigan 7, and is that the race that sticks out to you as the big one, or what other race and toss-up is important to you?
Yeah, I think Michigan 7 is interesting to me because it's the only actual open seat that's on this list right now. Now, the Santos seat could also be open. Who knows what will happen with that? Jacob can tell you more about that race specifically. But Michigan 7 is kind of the only seat where neither party has the advantage of incumbency. You have two relatively similar likely nominees on both sides. So Tom Barrett, a former state senator, is the likely Republican nominee. And then Curtis Hertel, another former state senator, is the likely Democratic nominee. These are both white men who are in their 40s, so that you already have like some similarities there. There's obviously biographical differences, but it's going to be kind of I think, really interesting test of at like the most fundamental level, which party this cycle ends up benefiting. Because like Jacob said, this is one of the most evenly divided districts in the country. Biden barely won it in 2020. And Democrats expect that the presidential race is going to be close again here. They're not expecting Biden to automatically win this seat. And so it's going to be a really interesting race to watch. And geographically, I forgot to mention this earlier, this seat is right in the middle of Michigan. It's based in Lansing, the state capital. It's also got MSU. And so there's a lot of just like different geographic factors of this district, too, that kind of make it a microcosm of the country.
In one of the districts in 2022 where Democrats boosted turnout among college students that they believe helped
Right.
push at the time Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin over the top. She's running for the Senate. That's why this is an open seat. We have to talk about George Santos, not just because he invented Congress. I'm not sure if you all remember that, but because of the circumstances. We have it in a toss-up, but that is with the expectation that he is not going to be the nominee in 2024. But Jacob, give a little bit more of the landscape of what we think is going to happen in that district right now.
So George Santos, of course, the embattled congressman from New York's 3rd District, facing a whole litany of federal felony charges. He represents the basically northern Nassau County is the best way to describe this district, with just a little bit of Queens. This is out on Long Island. Look, there are a number of different ways that this district could play out over the next 14 months. Right. Santos is currently facing charges. If he cuts a plea deal and resigns from Congress, and that's often part of plea deals that members of Congress cut in these legal cases, as long as he does that before July of next year, there will be a special election to fill that seat out on Long Island. In that case, New York law actually provides that the local party leaders are the ones who select the party nominees. There's not a primary election to select the nominees for a special election. And what we've heard from our sources is that on the Democratic side, at least, the Nassau County Democratic Party chair, Jay Jacobs, who is also the state party chair, is probably going to pick former Congressman Tom Suozzi, who held this seat from 2016 until last year when he ran for governor. He's not currently running for this seat, but it's kind of an open secret that he wants to be back in Congress. On the Republican side, it's a much more open picture. There are a number of different candidates in the mix. Some of the biggest names have actually taken themselves out of contention. State Senator Jack Martins, Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman have both said they're not interested, but there are a couple other names out there that are floating around. There's a retired NYPD detective who's impressed local party leaders there. So that's what happens in the event of a special election. If Santos does not resign, or if he resigns after July, then there's no special election. New York law says it's too late. The seat remains vacant until the fall. If he runs again, he'll face a primary challenge from that NYPD detective, Mike Sapriconi, as well as a Navy veteran and Air Force veteran and JP Morgan executive named Kellen Curry. There's a financial planner who's in the race. There's a number of other kind of local figures who are either in or thinking of running against Santos. This is an incredibly unpopular politician, George Santos. People in the district do not like him. They feel like they were hoodwinked. He's not going to win a primary if he runs. So either way, he's not going to be on the ballot in 2024. And Republicans will have a chance with a different candidate to try and maintain their hold on the district. They hope that the crime issues and especially the influx of migrants into New York City that's captured so much local media attention there will be enough to propel them to another set of upset victories in the 3rd District and in the 4th District to the south.
As opposed
and Santos even... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go.
Okay. I don't know if I can do it. I was going to make a joke about crime and Santos's legal troubles.
That's all right. Try it.
I don't know if I can now. I lost exactly what I was going to say.
I think that'll be the Democratic rejoinder. It's like, oh, you say you're tough on crime, yet here are 5 photos of you campaigning with George Santos when he ran either in 2022 or he was also the Republican nominee for this district in 2020. I think Democrats are going to, especially in a special election, right? If they are going to try and leverage the shadow of Santos over any Republican who's on the ballot here.
Yeah, which crimes are going to be front and center of this race? We'll see.
Exactly.
And Santos interrupted your life, Jacob, right? Jacob, you were giving a talk on the Hill not too long ago, and there was all the commotion outside in the hallway, and it ended up that it was just the media scrum or the entourage that follows George Santos everywhere around the Capitol complex these days. To me, the race, my Oregon bias is going to show again that the race that we have in toss-up, Oregon's 5th district, where Republican Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer is running for re-election. It's a Willamette Valley, Portland suburbs, but then stretches all the way into Central Oregon to Bend and Redmond, of the kind of the population boom there. This is a district that Biden carried in 2020, but Republicans actually did well in the midterm elections. It almost helped elect the first Republican governor of Oregon in 40 years. And so Democrats believe there's going to be a bounce back there. The question is, by what margin would Biden win this district? And is it enough to get a Democrat over the top against the Congresswoman? And Democrats have to sort through this primary between Jamie McLeod Skinner, who defeated an incumbent Kurt Schrader in the primary, but then Schrader turned his back on her, was vocally against her. The National Party did not invest money, and she still almost won the race. But now there's a couple other candidates in the race, and so a couple other Democrats running against her. A lot of moving parts, but I think this district will tell us a lot about what's happening, not only how Democrats navigate primaries and handle races, but also is there a bounce back in some of these blue states that boosts Democrats and could help them get over the top in the majority. We also made 10 rating changes in our recent issue of Inside Elections. Erin, I'll start with you on which of those 10. We're not going to run down all 10 of these. Our subscribers already got them. Other folks, you could try to check those out, pieces of them online. But Erin, which of those 10 do you think is either most significant, or maybe what was the most controversial one that we fought about internally before we went forward?
Oh, that's a good question. I think two of the ones that were two of the obvious changes that we made that we were kind of on the fence about last time were Texas 28 and Florida 23, which probably mean nothing to you unless you study these districts closely. But Texas 28 is the one represented by Henry Cuellar, who is a fairly well-known figure. He is probably the most conservative Democrat in Congress right now. He's faced some high-profile primary challengers over the past couple of cycles. But we had this rated as likely Democratic because last cycle there was a lot of Republican enthusiasm about potentially flipping some South Texas congressional seats. They ended up flipping one of them, but the other two, the Democratic incumbents running there, did quite well. Cuellar won by double digits. It was like the high double digits too. And so it really wasn't a competitive race after all. And he narrowly survived his primary challenge as well, obviously. And so we had that at likely Democratic. We moved that to solid Democratic because right now this district is not even on Republicans' official target list. And they really have not found a serious challenger here. He also doesn't have a serious primary challenge this cycle. And he has really shown an ability to connect with this district in a way that I think a lot of folks were surprised by last cycle, on both sides, who thought that they could take him down. He also has some of his own legal troubles, potentially. The FBI raided his house last year. So there's just a lot of interesting facets here. But despite all of that, we are moving this off the chart into solid Democratic territory for now, unless something significant changes. And we did a similar thing with Florida's 23rd district. We moved that from likely Democratic to solid Democratic. Some of these Florida races have been particularly difficult to handicap for me because 2022 was such a good year for Republicans. DeSantis and Rubio won by double digits. And there were a lot of races that on paper should have been competitive, but were not that competitive, and Republicans did very well in. I think that Florida is obviously trending towards Republicans. And Republicans are favored to win there at the presidential level, and they're favored to win the Senate race next year. But we're probably not going to see the kind of overperformance that we saw in 2022. And so even though the Democratic nominee in Florida's 23rd district only won this race by 5 points last cycle, he really doesn't face any serious Republican challengers right now, and he should be in a much better position in a presidential year. So we have that moved from likely Democratic to solid Democratic.
And to give everyone a little peek behind the scenes as we do our ratings, we are talking with Republicans and Democrats, and it's good to know what races they're focused on. And for example, Florida 23 right now, Republicans are not focused on it. So that doesn't mean that Republicans can't win,
Yeah.
but it's an indication that it's not going to get the money, the time, and the attention that is often needed in order to win a race. And so that is one of the things that we take into account when we're rating races. But Jacob, out of the 10 rating changes that we recently made, what was the one that still sticks out to you, or is there one that we all fought about that we're not that we're not willing to admit until now live on this podcast?
I mean, I think Montana 1 sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah, I think that was one of the two that I was going to point out. The Montana's first district, we had rated as likely Republican. We moved it to lean Republican. That's a shift in Democrats' favor. Incumbent Ryan Zinke has a lot of baggage. He's got, especially, he's got kind of nonpartisan baggage, I think, is the best way to think about it. It's not necessarily like your traditional, like, oh, Democrats really hate this thing about him, but Republicans are fine with him. There are things about him in his record that voters in the district just don't really like. And so we saw him win a much closer than perhaps anticipated victory last cycle, just about 3 points against Democrat Monica Tranel, both candidates under 50% in this district that Trump would have carried by 7 points in the 2020 election. Tranel is back for a rematch. Democrats are focused on this race now in a way that they weren't last cycle. Perhaps the best thing Tranel has going for her is that, she's running against Ryan Zinke again. He's not running for Senate. Which was a potential at the beginning of this cycle, but B, that she gets to share the ticket with Senator John Tester, the Democratic incumbent, up for re-election statewide in Montana. Now, we have that race rated as a toss-up, but what that means is that in this district, which is the more Democratic leaning of the two Montana seats, John Tester is going to win here. If he wants to win statewide, he probably has to win this district by double digits, and so the amount of investment that he's going to put in here, especially on some Native American reservations where Tranel really struggled last cycle, should do at least a little bit to boost her own campaign. Whether it's enough to get her across the finish line, I think that's still an open question. We still see Zinke as the favorite here, but clearly more of a lean Republican race than a likely Republican.
And Trump's
the other one.
Oh, go ahead. We keep doing this.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is still going to win this district. By how much, I think is, if he wins it by anywhere from 4 to 8 or 9 points, I wouldn't be surprised. I think that the tremendous amount of growth in Western Montana, the California transplants, people coming in from elsewhere, people with education and a lot of money are making this district ever so slightly more favorable to Democrats. Historically, it's also been kind of the hub of Democratic activity in Montana. So she'll have to outperform Trump, certainly, or outperform Biden. But I think Zinke's own difficulties mean that there are going to be some Trump voters who aren't going to really want to deal with him. The other district.
I was going to say, and Monica Tranel, a former Olympic rower. And next summer we will have the Olympics. Well, meaning that they will take place in Paris. And so I don't know, maybe she can get a boost out of the attention on the Olympics and in her background.
Yeah, we'll see. Though, Nathan, as you've written, I think maybe multiple times, the track record for former Olympians isn't always the strongest when it comes to running for Congress, at least.
Would you say she's rowing against the trend of Olympians running for Congress?
Maybe.
There we go. Those are the groans that I was hoping. I was hoping for, and a couple of changes that we made in favor of Republicans. Well, there was the Montana district, also New Jersey Congressman Tom Kean Jr. We had that in a toss-up. We moved it to tilting Republican, which is just outside, just one category outside of that. And also Oregon's 4th district, where Democratic Congresswoman Val Hoyle is involved or dealing with a flurry of headlines with regard to her tenure as labor commissioner. And various things. You can read in the newsletter more about that. Erin included more details on that. But we took that from solid Democratic to likely Democratic, which is more vulnerable. It's now what we would call officially on the House battleground map. There's one key challenge the Republicans have. They need a candidate. They have a scenario right now where they think she's vulnerable, but they need a candidate. They need a candidate to defeat her. One race that we haven't talked about that isn't a toss-up and isn't in our list of changes is Maine's 2nd district, where Republicans are excited about their new challenger.
The pride of Fort Kent, Maine, Austin Theriault.
This is a real treat for me. A Maine native, Austin Theriault, making his debut in the Nationwide Series.
I'm excited. It's a dream come true.
His NASCAR Nationwide Series debut.
Austin Theriault, pretty impressive, running a limited schedule.
He's worked hard to get where he's at, and the whole state has rallied behind him.
Austin Theriault looks to make his mark here today.
Jacob, where is Maine's 2nd district, and why are Republicans so excited about Austin Theriault?
Maine's 2nd district, Nathan, is all of northern Maine. It's really most of Maine geographically, but there's a small slice of populated area at the bottom of the state that encompasses the 1st district, and then pretty much everything north of that is the 2nd district, all the way up to the Canadian border, which is where Austin Theriault, the Republican former NASCAR driver and current state representative, lives. He grew up right along the Canadian border in the uppermost reaches of Maine. He is French Canadian, as you might expect from his name, Theriault.
I wasn't even going to try that, Jacob. You did. You did.
I don't think that qualifies as me trying it either. I was channeling Ricky Bobby, but Jared Golden has had a really strong grip on this district since he wrested it from Bruce Poliquin back in 2018. Golden's vibe, his image, he is a tatted up Marine veteran who worked for Susan Collins, the Republican senator from Maine, before getting elected in his own right to the state assembly and then later to Congress. He ran an ad last year where he cracked a lobster with his bare hands. He's just a really good fit for the district. And the candidates Republicans have run against him have not necessarily had that same kind of appeal to voters separate and apart from their politics, because this is a Republican-leaning district, which is why Republican strategists are excited about Theriault, both because he comes from a part of the state that Republicans haven't picked their nominee from before, up in that northern Maine kind of area. Also because he's young, he's only 29. He was just elected to the state house last year, and he's got this interesting background as a race car driver, right? He started on the very local circuit, kind of worked his way up through New England, and eventually raced in not the top NASCAR series, but the second highest Cup series in NASCAR, before he transitioned to politics. So it's a different profile than Bruce Poliquin, of course, who was a money manager, Dale Crafts, who was the local state representative who ran against Golden in 2020 and lost. And Republicans think that they might have a shot with a different kind of candidate this time around.
And Erin, I noticed that when you were talking about Michigan and you mentioned two dudes in their 40s, that you didn't say that they were young, but Jacob said at 29 that Terry's young. But I'm not going to be offended.
I think that's factually accurate.
Oh man! All right. And when Republicans unveiled Austin as their candidate, my first question was, does he have tattoos? Because in his ads, Jacob, you mentioned one of his ads, but in his ads, he seems to strategically always have his long sleeves sort of rolled up to demonstrate those that he's not a normal politician in any way. And we have this.
He's a cool congressman. Yeah. He's not a normal congressman. He's a cool. There you go.
So I don't know if there's a tattoo parlor at the NRCC that they're going to be utilizing or not.
Well, look, he just needs to call up Eli Crane's guy, Congressman Crane from Arizona's second district. In his launch video, he already had several tattoos, but his launch video featured him getting another tattoo on camera while talking about why he was running for Congress. So maybe Terrio can take some inspiration.
Yeah, notably, none of these people are running where my parents live. That's obviously not an asset.
They would not win their votes. Yeah. They're part of the anti-tattoo pack.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and this is the type of district where, or I wouldn't be surprised maybe if some Democrat or some Republicans would give to a golden U.S. Senate campaign so that they could get him out of the second district and then an open seat, which Republicans would have a much better chance in an open seat there. But we're going to be, unlike some outlets that focus maybe too much on the presidential race, we're going to be focused on the House and the Senate as well. So there'll be a lot more to come on the fight for the House in the next year plus. And finally, our last segment, Look What I Found, where we highlight something that we stumbled across. It could be politics, sports, pop culture, food. It could be anything. Jacob, what did you find?
So I was in New Haven, Connecticut this past weekend, and I had a great lunch at a local pizza place called Ernie's Pizzeria in Westville. It's been around since the 70s, and the owner, Pat, he makes every single pizza that goes through there by hand. He's the only one who makes the pies. They're delicious. They do a white birch beer as well, which I've never had before as a drink, and it went perfectly with a slice of pizza or 3 or 4.
Have you ever seen Mystic Pizza, Jacob?
I have seen Mystic Pizza a while ago, and I've also seen the 30 Rock episode where Jenna Maroney stars in the Broadway musical adaptation of Mystic Pizza as well.
It sounds like you're living in Mystic Pizza.
Both hold equal weight in my mind. Yeah.
And what district is that?
This is Connecticut's 3rd district. It is represented by a longtime Congresswoman, Rosa DeLauro, who I believe was chairwoman of the House Appropriations Committee last time when Democrats had the majority. So a very important figure in Democratic politics in the House.
There you go. Erin, what did you find?
So I found a new word game. It's called Connections. It's on the New York Times Games app. This is not sponsored, but I've been playing it like every morning for the past couple of weeks. It's like the new Wordle for me. It's nice because it's like slightly more challenging than Wordle, but it's not like a full crossword puzzle, so it doesn't take too much time. And basically, the premise is the game Codenames, if you've ever played that, where you're making like word associations between groups of words, except it's like a solo game. But it's a lot of fun. I'd recommend it. I love having a new hyperfixation. That's a fun little word game that only takes up like 10 minutes of my time. So.
And it feels like people don't feel compelled to tell us the results of their connections like they do Wordle. I feel
I'm telling people. Just not online. I have multiple group chats,
that's fine. Okay. And are you the best of your friend group at Wordle at Connections?
It depends on the day and our knowledge bases. It varies widely.
And Jacob, are you in on Connections yet? I play it intermittently. I find it very frustrating. As Erin said, it's tougher than Wordle. I still am a devoted Wordler, but Connections is it can get on my nerves sometimes. I often kind of quibble with the specific categories. I think that there's too much leeway, but that's of course the point of the game, that you've got to see the full picture when you're doing it.
Well, I found more from my parents' house. I found some old concert show flyers from my college days in Orange County. This one, though, the bands Zayo, Training for Utopia, Spitfire, Silver Rocket Revolver. If you are listening to this podcast and you've heard of any of those bands, you should email me because we should probably be friends. But what stuck out to me is this show was $5. $5. Now, it was at a place called Coos Cafe, which is just was a vacant house, and bands played in the living room, and it was a little loud. That's probably why I can't hear. But $5, that's not even you can't even go to a concert now, and the service charge is way more than $5. So I thought that was pretty remarkable back in the day, and it wasn't in the Civil War era that I was going to these. It was probably 1997.
Did you spend a lot of time in vacant houses in your college years?
At Coos Cafe, I did, but if that's the most trouble I was getting into, was going to shows and at Coos, then I think I turned out best. And I should say, I believe that is Lou Correa's district now, California's 46th district, which I was not aware of at the time. I was too busy going to shows, not really reading the Almanac of American Politics or anything like that.
Was Correa there back then as well, or who?
I have no idea. I mean, I at least I was not. He could have been. I don't even know if he was in the state legislature back then, but that was not a focus. It wasn't until a few years later that I even caught the political bug. It was all about concerts and trying to get some decent grades. That's all the time we have. We broke down the fight for the House majority, including the toss-up races, race rating changes, and an intriguing Republican challenger in Maine who is looking to pick up speed against one of Democrats' toughest incumbents. Thank you for joining us. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Please go to InsideElections.com, subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions as well as group packages that are tailor-made for association and corporate PACs. If you like this episode, please do all the things you're supposed to do. Subscribe, comment, tell your friends, give us a rating on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button. Also leave a comment there. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Dale Earnhardt Jr. We also wanted to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and our associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.